Welcome to Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. I'm excited about this interview as I am all of them. If you have followed me on any of my other podcasts, you know that I get the privilege and the honor and the opportunity to interview titans of all types, different fields, high achievers, best-selling authors. And today is no different. Today, it's my privilege to have David Marquet as my guest. He is the best-selling author and also a former submarine captain. In fact, he's retired today. But there was a time when he was assigned to command the nuclear-powered submarine USS Santa Fe, then ranked last in retention and operational standing. He turned his ship around by treating the crew as leaders, not followers, and giving control, not taking control. This revolutionary approach not only took the Santa Fe from the worst to the first in rankings, but also created more subsequent leaders than any other submarine. Stephen R. Covey called the Santa Fe the most empowering organization he had ever seen and wrote about Captain Marquet's leadership practices in his book, The Eighth Habit. And I got to tell you, as you get into this interview, it is powerful. I mean, David Marquet almost stumbled. In fact, he did. He stumbled on this new leadership approach, which, by the way, I know in the book that I wrote in 2007, The Secret of the Slight Edge, if you read the preface to that book, we talk about turning the power over to the people. So this is really cool to be able to interview someone of like mind. And so David Marquet is the best-selling author of Turn the Ship Around, a true story of turning followers into leaders. Fortune magazine named it the #1 must-read business book of the year, and USA Today listed it as one of the top 12 business books of all time. Wow, isn't that cool? And he recently came out with a workbook around the original book, Turn Your Ship Around. It's called the Turn the Ship Around workbook. Implement intent-based leadership in your organization. Welcome, Mr. David Marquet.
Hey, thanks, TJ. Thanks for having me on your show. And hello to all the listeners.
Wow, this is great to have you as a guest on this podcast show. Typically what I do when I have a guest come on is I will ask them to share go back in time. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about a history. How did you end up in the Navy? Kind of give us some of your backstory, if you would.
Okay. I was born in Berkeley, California, back in 1959, way back then. My dad was going to school there. And then I grew up in Massachusetts, and I was like one of those geeky kids. This was in the 70s. I graduated from high school in 1977. And so I was on the math team and the chess team. I was on a computer club, which meant taking these rolls of pink tape that had these holes punched in it, feeding it into the computer, and then, pushing play and going home and crossing your fingers and coming back the next morning to see how long your program ran before it hung on something in the middle of the night. And but the 70s, I kind of describe them as like the country was in this chronic malaise, as I certainly was. And we were in this contest with the Soviet Union about whether, at least in my mind, and it's hard to believe now, but whether, humans would organize themselves in liberal democracies where people could choose their path, their spouse, their job, or whether we were going to organize ourselves in the model that the Soviet Union had. And I felt pretty strongly about the liberal democracies. And so if you're an introvert and you say, well, I'm going to go do something about that, I'm going to go join the military, then you only got one option: submarines, because that's where you can hide. Your job is literally to hide from people. That's perfect. so I said, well, I'm going to be a submarine commander. Now, I had no military in my family, so this kind of came out of the blue and surprised my parents. And but I read all the history books, and I read about the submarine force in World War II. It was all had that. It was vivid in my mind what those guys did. And so that's what I wanted to do. And so I set myself on the path, and I got myself accepted to the Naval Academy, and I was off to the races.
Did you end up going to college? Where did you go to college?
Yeah, so I went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, which, it's, some people would say it's college, some people wouldn't, but it's 4 years, you come out with a degree. Mm-hmm. And at the Naval Academy, they teach leadership. So remember, this is now we're in the early 80s, right? Mm-hmm. And they gave me a book. And remember, I'm a very serious student. So they gave me this book. I opened the book. It says Leadership, page 1, chapter 1. Leadership. Leadership is directing the thoughts, plans, and actions of others so as to obtain and command their obedience, their respect, and their loyal cooperation. And I was like, yes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be really good at that. and I just, do you see the new Star Wars movie yet?
Sure did. Loved it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly the way all those leaders operate. They direct people's thoughts, plans, and actions.
Oh yeah.
And so we say, oh, that's a dead idea. No, it's not. It's still with us. Anyway, the thing is, I was scary good. I was scary good at this. I was a very serious student, and I was this pretty smart guy. And so I could see, I could see the problems. I could see what needed to be done often before other people. So I would jump up and say, no, everyone do this. Everyone do this. And, because I was, quote, scary good at that, the Navy kept promoting me. And then one day they said, hey, Marquet, you're going to go be the captain of a nuclear submarine. And I was like, woo, because that was what I wanted. Now, the Cold War had ended. But we still, now at this point, so this was in the late 90s, we were still doing stuff against, where we were collecting, we would do intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Basically, we're basically spy satellites that never go across the horizon. We just sit there, right? And we just absorb information off the coast. So that's what we were doing. So this is what happened, TJ. So I get assigned to be the captain of one ship, and they send you to school for a year, even though you've already been a submarine officer for 15 years. That's not enough. So a whole nother year just for your ship. And it's because if you think about that leadership definition, it's what I call a know-all, tell-all leadership model. The leader, since the leader is the leader, all the right answers reside in the leader. The job of the leader is to make decisions and drive the organization forward. Mm-hmm. And the role of the people is to execute the will of the leader as diligently and faithfully as possible.
That's right.
And so this is what I was going to do. So in order to fulfill that, the leader needs to be truly versed in all things. So so what happened was I go to school for 12 months. I fly to Hawaii. I'm 2 weeks away from taking over. And they say, no, you're not going to that ship. You're going to go to another ship. You're going to go to the USS Santa Fe. And the Santa Fe was, as you said, it was like the end run of the fleet. It was the worst performing ship, worst morale, 135 sailors, in the previous 12 months. Every month the Navy publishes a list. They rank all the submarines in terms of their ability to keep sailors in the Navy. Mm-hmm. Santa Fe was at the bottom. They only three sailors had re-enlisted in the previous 12 months. That was it. Wow. That's how bad it was. Yeah. And what happened was the guy was supposed to be there another year, and so they hadn't announced that. So some poor sad sack was going to get announced to be the captain of the Santa Fe and send 12 months of school, and in a year they were going to go relieve this guy, but he quit a year early. And so now there's this gap, and the Navy said, oh, well, Marquet, you just finished the school. Yeah, it was for a different ship, but the physics of submarining didn't change. All the buttons did. And you're going to go to the Santa Fe, which was one of the newest ships in the fleet. So
but let me stop you right there and say, so you had studied almost a year every detail about that submarine, and then 2 weeks before you were thrown on the Santa Fe, right? That's kind of out of your comfort zone experience, I would think, right?
Exactly. That messed with my head. That was my sugar moment, as I say. The Olympia was a fine running warship. She was stationed in Pearl Harbor, and the Santa Fe was nominally like an upgraded version of the Olympia, but basically everything was different. Every piece of gear was different, and the reactor was different. The engine, it was like I said, the physics were the same, the fundamental principles were the same, but the specifics of how you operated the ship were different. So I had a benefit because at least I knew things were different. Like I walk on the Santa Fe, I was like, oh my gosh, it's Alice in Wonderland. I don't know what these buttons do. Because normally you would know that. As a captain, you could go to any piece of gear up and down the ship and know which buttons to push. That's what ends up after a year of training.
Right.
And so I couldn't do that on the Santa Fe. And so I'm sort of puzzled. I asked my sailors, hey, well, tell me about I kind of had this curiosity now. And it really felt different because in the past, I would ask these questions. Hey, tell me about your equipment. But it really wasn't. Yeah. You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah,
right?
You knew the answer.
Exactly. It was a test. It was a test, right? And everybody knew it. And then when they would say, I keep asking questions. We had the word we call it stump the dummy, right? I keep asking questions, and because all he'd done for the last year was just study. So I knew I had all the latest and greatest. So I would keep asking questions so the guy, I could stump him. And, you really should know. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should.
That's good.
Anyway, but now I'm the guy who doesn't know. And I'm like, hey, tell me about this. And I'm really curious to find out. And so they're like, and eventually, the same thing happens. The sailor's like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden, and I'm like, oh crap, I shouldn't have asked that because they all look at me.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
As a captain. Now I'm supposed to know. And I'm like, hey guys, I don't know either.
And you were straight up with
them.
You told them that?
Yeah. But I will tell you that moment, I so remember that moment because they look at all of a sudden I'm in this room in sonar with 4 or 5 guys. They all look at me and there's this moment and I'm like, am I going to pretend to know or I'm just going to be straight up with these dudes? And I think there was something about the fact that I was on the ship and I was sort of in this, to say I was in a daze was probably overstating it, but I was definitely, I was not in my comfort zone. And so I was sort of, I think I was open to just saying, yeah, I don't know either. And I mean, the guys knew, right? They knew their captain quit. They knew I was trained for a different ship. So in a way, they already knew that I didn't know. And so as soon as I said that, there was this whole big sigh of relief, and everyone sort of laughed and was like, yeah, we're all it. And I always felt that was a sign of weakness, but it actually was very powerful and honest. So I think, I tell all the people that we coach and everything, you got to say, I don't know.
That's
you
right.
got to say it. Just say it, right? If you can't say it, your people can't say it. If your people can't say it, your people aren't going to learn. You're not going to have a learning organization. Everybody's like, oh, I know that. I know everything.
Dude,
then I'm scratch my head.
That is really powerful. And I agree with it. 2 of the principles that we teach with the organizations and people we coach is authenticity and vulnerability. And I often will tell the story of when one of the things I did with my kids, raising, I have 2 older ones that have left home, and we took a break and had 2 girls, so they're still at home. But one of the things that I've done over the years is do these father and son, father and daughter interviews on a regular basis. Just a time where we could go up to the bedroom, visit. They know it's not a time where dad's going to scold them or dad's going to get after them on something. They know it's a time they can pour their hearts out. I ask them about their life. I ask them about, if it's the boys, I'll ask them about girls, right? I'll ask them just life questions as they were growing up. And I remember in one of them, when my oldest was 12 years old, I had this impression. It speaks to exactly what you're talking about here. And a little bit different, but still. I said, okay, Bryce, before we end, I got one question for you. After I had just listened to him 80% of the time, ask questions and listen, ask questions and listen. And he poured his heart out to me. And then I said, Bryce, I got one last question for you. How can I be a better dad? And I remember Bryce, the natural response was to recoil in a sense and be like, Dad, you're the best dad ever. And I'm like, I know, but really, how can I be a better dad, right? And he knew I was sincere because I looked him in the eyes and I gave that impression that I was sincere. I really want to know, how can I be a better dad? And I'll remember it just the same as you did in that moment. I can remember still today. He was leaning up against the head of the bed, against the wall, the back wall, and he said, "Oh, Dad, but you're fine. You're good." I said, "No, son, I want to really know." And then he paused and he got quiet. And he said, "Well, Dad, all right." He says, "It seems like lately you've been kind of snappy with everybody around the house." And I remember my heart just dropped. I was like, "Well, you noticed it?" I mean, maybe the stress was high or something else.
I wasn't able to hide that.
I wasn't able to hide that, and he goes, "No." Yeah. And then he didn't want to say much more than that. That was enough for me anyway. And I said, "You know what, Bryce? I really appreciate you telling me that, and I will make it my focus to improve in that area." And I feel like as I go around and train, maybe you've experienced this. You go around and train different managers and leaders in different organizations. In some organizations, there's the good old boy network. In other organizations, people are trying to protect themselves. They're afraid to show a little bit of vulnerability or not know something or not have an answer. And this is what you're speaking to.
Yeah, well, how wonderful a story is that? And it really took a lot of guts for you to say, hey, how can I be a better father? Mm-hmm. What we say is, I'm tired of all this stuff about how to give feedback, right? Mm-hmm. I don't care about that. What I want is how to invite feedback, right? And so, no one's going to take feedback if they're not interested in feedback. I don't care how you couch it. It doesn't matter. The research just shows it's not going to work.
That's good.
So what I told my guys, I said, look, so here's what happened. So I go on the ship and I'm like, well, I'm going to make a deal with you guys. I'm not going to give you any orders. I'm not going to tell you what to do because if I do, I'm going to screw it up. But you guys have to stop waiting to be told what to do. You guys got to come and use words. I intend to just say, I intend to whatever, and then make me stop you. Mm-hmm. And I said, I can kind of get into that because that was very powerful. But the point of this, but the point was, I knew I would slide. I'd be backsliding. I knew that when I got stressed, I'd backslide. And so I had to say, and if I'm telling you guys, if I backslide and tell you guys what to do, I need you guys to yellow card me. And I need you guys to help me see reflect the mirror back on myself and allow me to focus on getting my be true to the leader that I want to be. Mm-hmm. And initially, they didn't want to do it, blah, blah, blah. They didn't want to call me out, whatever. I was like, no, you're Bryce. Helping me.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, you're exactly like that. And I said, no, you're actually helping me. Mm-hmm. And when I kind of couched it like that, you're not calling me out. I'm asking for this.
Right.
And that worked really well. Because of course, those times when you start, sometimes you notice you're not being the way you want to be, but sometimes you don't, or you're just caught up in the moment and you really need, to me, it's like a circuit. It's just like a pause. Just push the pause button. So we just push the pause button. I call it the timeout play. Let's just, not like you're in timeout. Let's just take a pause. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's just take a pause, pause time. Cause we almost always have time to pause time. And then just take a breath. And then everything's good.
So for every leader that's listening right now, did you feel like, I think I know your answer, but did you feel like you gained more respect from that over time or lose respect? I mean, obviously you had to if you turned the ship around, which is what you did. But what would, maybe over time, what was the feedback in terms of leadership respect? Because I would think that some people listening to this is like, oh, I can't give that much control away, or that's too much vulnerability for me.
Yeah. So, and I get that question a lot. People say, oh, well, that took a lot of courage, or were you worried about losing respect? So here's the deal.
Okay.
And I've thought about this a lot. I will tell you, for me, it was simply desperation and honesty, I guess, but it was mostly desperation. It's like I just knew I couldn't give orders and get this thing to work. But I think there's leaders play in couple different domains. One is the what we're going to do, and one is the how we're going to operate. And the way I think about my experience on the Santa Fe was I release control of the what. In other words, you guys decide where we're going to submerge. You guys decide how we're going to get ready for deployment. You guys decide what preparations we're going to do for the reactor startup, keeping me informed so that I can know what's going on, ask questions, provide some backup. But I'm going to be the guy who defines how we interact and how we talk to each other. And I think you have to play this role where for me, I was pretty strict about how we operate. For example, I would say, look, there's no they on Santa Fe. If you refer to anybody else on board the ship, on our team with the word they, you will be ignored by me. I will just ignore you. And you're going to say the word we. And that, again, was very powerful. But, it took a while for it to catch on.
Sure.
But I was very strict about that. And I was pretty strict about, people would say, use the word strict. I was very consistent, maybe is the better word. Like when you came to me and you didn't say what you intend to do, again, I ignored you. I was just like, well, I would just actually not even talk to you. Say, Captain, request permission to Captain. That doesn't even count. I wouldn't even look at you. Captain, I intend to submerge the ship. Oh, okay. Blah, blah, blah. So, but what I see the problem a lot of leaders do is they're either strict on both, like not only tell people how to work, but what to do, or they're loosey-goosey on both. So, hey, you can decide how we're going to operate, and which also I think is a mess.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
Right.
So I think the old model of leadership that I had been brought up in is that we focus all our time and energy on telling people what to do. And now I spend a lot more time trying to figure out how the team should interact and what our organizational structures are that allow us to release the what. So that's where I'm at now.
That's a huge shift. So it sounds like you laid some specific principles out there, like the they versus the we, like you preferred we or a team effort here.
Yeah.
So you laid some strong principles out there. So kind of a guidepost, if you will, that they had to operate around. But within that, you gave them the tools and the autonomy and the freedom to take the ship where it needs to go in alignment with those values and so forth. And you allowed the team to use their own strengths to come together stronger. It was Ken Blanchard on this same podcast several months ago who wrote 1 Minute Manager, who said that all of us are stronger than any one of us. And so it sounds like that's kind of the culture you were creating in there, that everybody has value.
Yeah, definitely. And, we all see more than any one person sees. Like, just start with that. Like, show a picture to some people, and then put it away, and then say, okay, what did you all see? And then each person, let them write it down in their notebooks, and they'll all see, and then say, and then put it all together, and then say, did any one person get what everybody wrote down? No, never. But I actually, it was a little bit different than the way you phrased it. I think there were principles behind it, but I really didn't spend a lot of time talking about that. Like, I never said the word empowerment. I was like, say these words. When you come up to me, I want you to say these words. I want, when you refer to, don't say they didn't order the right part or they didn't schedule the maintenance. Just say we didn't order the right part. And over and over and over again, I would just, I can't tell you how many times I say, just, these are the words I want to come out of your mouth.
Right. I intend to.
Exactly. I intend to. That was like the big one. And because when you tell people be empowered or something like that, they all have different ideas of what that means. So basically, you take an idea in your head, which is very crystal clear, and then you use a fuzzy word. They hear a fuzzy word, and it splinters into 10 million different interpretations.
Totally.
So I just said, you know what? Just say I intend to. That's what empowerment means to us. And the cool thing about that is, in most organizations, it's by default a permission-based organization. So in other words, if someone wants to do something, but the boss has not said yes. So in other words, we're waiting to get on their schedule to brief them. We're waiting for a response in email. What's happening? Nada. It's dead time. We're waiting. And it's not, the boss isn't waiting, but the organization is in pause mode. And when you shift it to intent, the organization is never in pause mode because the organization just keeps saying, I intend to, I intend to, I intend to. And the boss, you don't answer your email for a week. What happens? Nothing. You just don't know, but people are still doing things. So they say, this is what we intend to do. They don't hear back from you. They do it. That's the big difference. The default is yes. And that's really powerful.
Did you give, did you give any of the what though? Did you say, here's in the end where we need to go, or this is what we need to reach? I'm assuming just to come up with these phrases, you had to come up with that. I mean, you had to kind of set everybody down and say, hey, this is where I, as the leader, intend to help us become a powerful and great team. Did you lay that picture out?
Not really.
Really?
No. So here's the deal. So I show up, right? I don't want it to sound, TJ, like I had this master plan and I showed up and I kind of unrolled, the sequence of events, and it all played out as I had foreseen. It was like I show up, I don't know the ship.
Yeah.
I asking questions about stuff I don't know the answer to. I also, then one of the very first orders I gave, you couldn't do it. I basically asked them to shift into on a backup motor. I said, hey, shift into second gear, but there's only one gear. And it wasn't any big deal, but the thing that was scary was the officer, parroted what I said. And I was like, what? And then it came out later, the crew member said, no, we only have one gear. I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, well, did you know that? And he said, yes. The officer said, yes. And I said, so you knew that it was a bogus order and you still gave it? He's like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Like, riddle me that. Why? And he's like, well, you told me to, because remember the definition of leadership. Directing the thoughts, plans, and actions, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for. And we know culturally, like you can laugh and your listeners like, oh, that's just a bunch of crazy, submarine guys that are stuck in a rigid hierarchy. I don't think so.
Yeah.
You go to you read all these, lots of hierarchies have the same problem where the person at the top issues an order. People know it's not right, but it's easier to say, well, I was doing what I was told, because then you have an excuse, than to not do it. So what happened was I made a deal where I said, look, guys, rather than me giving bad orders and then you having to correct me, how about we just skip that step? How about you just tell me what we should be doing?
Oh, that's
and we all
good.
shook hands on that. We looked each other in the eyeball and we said, and that's where we were off the races. So I just said, look, just say, so that was the background, but I just said, look, just say I intend. I just want you to come and say I intend to. And most of the things that we did were based like that. So, for example, another story was, we call this push authority to information, not information to authority. But there used to be this long chain. If you wanted to go on vacation, you needed 6 people to sign a piece of paper, coming all the way up to the second in command. And I just said, that's nonsense. That's pushing the information, because the immediate supervisors, the chiefs, would know, but they didn't have the authority to sign the bottom line. Like Navy reg said, it had to go to the second in command. So I just kind of lined it out. I wrote, these are now the USS Santa Fe version of the Navy reg. I said, now the chief can sign the piece of paper. And I took these forms and I just blacked out all the signatures of all the officers. I just said these signatures are no longer needed. And so So my view of change, cultural change is phrased up like this: we act our way to new thinking, not think our way to new action. So in other words, we change the culture by simply taking some very small but concrete, noticeable steps and acting in a different way. And 6 months later, people said, "This is the most empowering place I've ever seen." The we versus they, when everyone in the whole team refers to everyone as we, it feels like a team, and it's the most collaborative team-like environment you've ever felt. They would say that. And I would say, no, we don't have a culture of teamwork. What we have is a rule that you have to use the word we. But in every case, it was the action that preceded the feelings. And I think a lot of change programs, we try and get it backwards. We sort of preach a bunch of feeling, hey, I want it to feel like a team. Go make that happen. And then people just won't wander around befuddled.
Yeah, I agree. That's true. Okay, so I'm having a little bit, because there may be one other listener that might have the same thought I do, so I'm going to ask it.
Yeah.
The disconnect I have is, well, I have two questions. First of all, a lot of this shifting in terms of how to lead the team on that, the Santa Fe, you were in the depths of the water at this point. I mean, there was no going backwards, right? You had to figure it out. The pressure was on, right? Is that accurate?
True.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and by the way, TJ, on a submarine, like we say, the pressure, it really is pressure.
Yeah.
In business metaphor, it's normally just a metaphor.
Right. But it really is on a submarine. Right.
It really is pressure. Yeah.
Okay. So that makes sense. All right. So my question is, just so there's not a disconnect, going back a couple questions ago about the what. I understand that allowing the team to be a player on the what and the how is really important. But if the U.S. Navy says, I want you to take the submarine from, just because it's local here to me, from Bangor, and I want you to sit off the shore of this country on the other side of the world, that's you as a leader have to give that direction. This is where we intend to go, big picture. Then you empower your people to really take ownership and help you get there. Is that a fair picture?
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't deciding where the submarine would go. I mean, the nation has a big, huge organization.
Sure.
The Department of Defense.
Right.
To figure all that out. And we would get, we would go, basically the way submarines work is you go on we go on 6 month deployments, which means we leave Pearl Harbor and we go off the coast of Asia or India or the Middle East or Africa or someplace, and we do our thing and we come back 6 months later. And I was not affecting that. So in other words, we had our mission statement, but here's how it works. Let's say Mexico is no longer, well, maybe that's a bad example. Let's say we want to go spy on Mexico. Okay.
All right. Hypothetically, right?
Hypothetically. So we say, okay. So basically, the way it would work is they would give a submarine like all of the water around Baja California. So it's thousands of square miles of water, and they would say, go there, and I want you to collect as much information as possible about either naval movements or cell phone towers or something. That's about as specific as it would be, and so it's not like there's an X on the chart and we just have to drive there. We have, we now then need to look at the chart, study the situation. Where are the ports? Where are the naval bases? Where are the communication facilities? Where are the airports? Where do we want to position the ship? How close? How far out? Closer, you get more information, but it's easier to get seen. Further out, less information, but it's a little bit safer and deeper. So there's all these trade-offs. These are all the trade-offs that, as much as possible, I invited the officers and the crew to make those decisions.
That totally makes sense. So there was a little piece of the what, right? Like, here, hey, crew, this is where we got to go. Our assignment and mission is to do this. And
Yeah.
then you lay the big vision out there of what needs to take place, but then you leave everything in between up to the team to make that a reality.
Yeah, and even exactly. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'm going to define the what, and you guys figure out how to get there." So to me, when most people say, "Well, you figure out how to get there," that's still part of the what. That's making the what happen. When I talk about how we work together. So, for example, in a meeting, I would say, ask. We're going to vote first and then have the discussion, not discuss something and then vote. That would be an example of how we operate. And the reason you do it that way is because as soon as you discuss it, you're reducing the variability of people's responses. And if you want to know what people really think, you got to ask them before they're contaminated by the discussion. So these are the hows that I was talking about. And you've seen the movies where, there's some secret orders and you open the envelope and only the captain looks at them, and the captain walks to the control room and puts his finger on the chart. So you guys need to drive here, right? And then the crew would be driving in some position, have no idea what they're doing. You saw that in the Star Wars movie, right? So the leaders are hiding the plan. Even the rebel leaders are doing the same. Like, no one knows the plan. Why? Because we need to have a reveal to make it dramatic for the viewers. But it's terrible leadership. Like, oh, we're gonna run away until our gas runs out, and but no one knows why. Anyway, so what I would need to do though is, rather than sort of being the sole person of that information, and then because that gives me power and control, is I would share it.
There you go.
Now we have security. Some of the stuff is highly classified, so there were certain restrictions on who you could share it with. But I would always share it to the limit of everybody who could see it. I would show them. And then the other thing was, I always let them tell me their idea before I told them mine. Because once you as the leader say, "Oh, hey, what do you guys think? We should turn left, right?" Everyone nods their head. Yeah, boss, great idea.
Mm-hmm. That's really good.
They'd be like looking at me. And I told them one day, because they're all looking at me, they wanted me to tell them the answer. And I was like, if you guys all think like me, or I made the mistake. No, I remember what happened. I made the mistake of like blurting out what I thought. And they're all like, "Yeah, it sounds good." I was like, "No, you guys are all fired, because if you guys all think like me, I don't need you. I don't know what I think. I need some difference."
That's right.
They're like, "What?"
Well, for some managers and some leaders, that's they take offense to that. Giving someone else that control, sometimes I just notice it all the time. It's wonderful to work with leaders of organizations that have a vision for the value that every team player brings to the table. In fact, in preparation for this interview, I printed off a couple things I had researched before. Southwest Airlines was one company I've done some in-depth study about, and Herb Kelleher, when he retired, he turned his company. First of all, Herb Kelleher once said, "Leading an organization is as much about soul as it is about systems." And when he retired, he turned over the company to Colleen Barrett, who became the president of Southwest Airlines. And she believed, quote, "Policies should be followed, but the people should use their brains to interpret them." And then in a hearing just a couple months ago, when the airline executives were sitting in front of, I think, the Ways and Means Committee, or it was the Judiciary Committee, the current CEO said, "Our employees are completely empowered to do what's right." I think, wow, there are organizations out there that see the vision of what you're talking about, but there are still some that have just find it difficult to let go of a little bit of that authority, in a sense, or that little bit of control, like you're talking about Star Wars. And what you and I have found, let me know how you feel about this, but what we have found is the more information you give to people, the better everybody's going to perform. The more people are going to be engaged, the more people are going to take more accountability.
Half the time when we had problems, I realized because there was some piece of information was inside my head, Well, it wasn't like I was trying to hide it. I just forgot to tell people,
Mm.
and sometimes it's not just information; it's nudges, it's hints, it's feelings. So, for example, we would say, okay, we come up with a plan. Okay, we're going to go to the north, and it was based on the fact that we need to get between the bad guy and the aircraft carrier. Well, we assumed the bad guy was in a certain location. The thing about submarining is nothing is certain because you can't actually see it. So it's all based on, hints and so everything has a probability. It's like quantum mechanics. So that has a probability. Like, there's an 80% chance that the enemy's there. There's a 20% chance he's not there. What if he's not there? Well, we hadn't, if we hadn't talked about that, then we're all marching down a single path and no one's looking over our shoulder and looking for clues that we might be wrong. We had to actively look for counterfactual information. Otherwise, you're dead because you miss it, and then they sneak in behind you.
Yeah, that's good. All right, another question. What is your feeling? Because I did read this. You said once, we're talking about mistakes here. When we focus on how well we learn from mistakes and not who to blame for the mistakes, individual effort explodes. Would you, to all the leaders and managers and supervisors listening to this interview right now, what would you say about mistakes and how to respond to mistakes?
Yeah, mistakes. Well, hopefully it's nothing really bad, but there are opportunities to learn. And so my thinking was really shaped by like Deming's work on statistical process control. And when a mistake I always thought about the way we interacted. It was one big system, and people are acting and behaving in a way which is stimulated by the system or the environment or the culture that they're in. So if they made a mistake, there are two possible approaches. Either we call it specific cause. In other words, the person, like, we're late, okay? Guy shows up late for a meeting. It was the traffic. Mm-hmm. Well, they act as if that's a specific cause. Like, oh, I didn't expect there to be traffic at 9 a.m. in Los Angeles, right? Mm-hmm. Or if they said a meteorite hit the 5 and gnarled up traffic, that's a specific cause. You say, okay, fine, it's not you. It's this thing that happened. It's this one thing that happened. But mostly it's the system, right? We all know traffic is going to be bad at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we didn't plan. If you didn't plan for that, like, you're operating within a system that's causing you to be late. Mm-hmm. So I always looked at the system. I'd always look at the system, and I'd always think, we already paid the dues. I thought about, like, this phrase, like, we paid tuition to go to learn from the mistake. I mean, the mistake happened. The costs were incurred. Mm-hmm. We might as well harvest as much learning as possible. Otherwise, that's just stupid. That's like paying for college and not showing up.
Right.
So in order to learn from your mistakes, you need to have, everyone needs to be totally open, honest about what happened. If they're not, you're not really going to learn. You're going to think you learn, but you're going to learn the wrong lessons because you don't really know what happened. You know a version of the story of what happened, and then whatever actions you take won't really solve the problem. So in order for people to be honest about what happened, you got to remove the fear of punishment. Now, every once in a while, sure, some guy, like, deliberately is trying to screw up, and the team knows the difference.
Right.
The team knows the difference. But if it's just someone was up for 36 hours and they threw the wrong switch, well, I'm sure they were trying their best. And so we would ask questions. Well, why were they up for 36 hours? And what was it they were doing? And what, did anyone know? And could they have said something? So we look at the system. Mm-hmm. So you pay tuition, you might as well learn. Otherwise, you're dumb.
That's really good. That's really good. Learning from your mistakes is part of the culture, and viewing it that way is really valuable. Otherwise, you create, I think, some malicious compliance, right? Kind of what you were talking about earlier. and you don't want to
Right.
create that. That's not inspiring.
I don't think groups make decisions. I think individuals make decisions. And we were always, even when we think a group makes decisions, it's really individuals decide whether or not they're going to agree with whatever the group's decided. So this idea of being able to divest decision making is laid on top of a very rigid hierarchy, which defines ownership. So, and I think that the absence of clear ownership definition makes it harder to do what we did, which was to push decision making down, because I could track a decision like the authority to load a torpedo.
Yeah.
And it would say the authority to load a torpedo is vested in the captain, and I could push it down to the weapons officer. It was very clear who that authority, if I were to go one level lower than me, it's very clear who that would go to. It would not go to the engineer, would not go to the supply officer, not go to the navigator, would go to the weapons officer. Everyone understood that. And so that, I think, was very helpful. And what I think is, in the absence of an organization where you have clear, so in other words, I said, focus on the how and release the what, focus on the ownership. I would whenever there was a problem, I had a little 2x2. Was there a process and was there an owner? And if there was no process and no owner, or either one of those were missing, then you had problems. And so I always wanted to know who the owner was, and allowed us to make. So when there's an owner, so for example, I let the chiefs make the decision who was going to go on vacation. And a guy could be a, quote, nice guy and say yes every time a guy asks to go on vacation. And then one day you come into work and half the sonar department's gone, right? But everyone would know it was you. There's no one to blame. There's no place to hide, right? You have the form. It's signed by you. You owned it. You screwed it up. And people get religion when they're the bottom. Whoever the bottom signature is on a form, that's the guy or gal who owns it.
Right.
And they're going to make sure that it's the right decision. So I think the opposite is true. When you have all these chains where it's going to be signed by 6 people, that actually invites irresponsible behavior, because you can always say, well, I know someone higher, this is kind of screwed up, but I'll be the nice guy. Someone higher up will have to say no. And that was kind of the behaviors that we saw.
I see. All right. What would you say, just a couple more questions. What would you say is maybe some, besides what we've talked about, just on the top of your head, what would you say some of the key characteristics of great leaders are that you've seen a pattern of?
Great leaders, they do a couple things that are unnatural for the rest of us. Number one, they focus on fixing the environment, not on the people. So when they see someone who's not doing something that they think is behaviorally supportive, they don't try and fix them. They look at the environment and they try to understand what is it that's resulting in that behavior. Number two is they give up control, and you're wired to take control. So good leadership always feels nerve-wracking, because you're going to act contrary to the way you're wired as a primate and a mammal, which is you want to build a hierarchy and climb yourself to the top. And so one of the things that we say is you want to level the power gradient. So you do things like, person comes into your office and you're sitting behind your desk, you have a big chair. Well, that's all symbols of power. And it's showing a steep power gradient. So what we would do is, like, I'd actually get up out of my chair and actually have my guys sit in my chair, say, hey, you sit here. And that elevates them and brings them closer to you, which makes it easier for them to tell you the truth.
Wow.
So when there's a big power gradient, you're not going to be speaking up. Right. And all these things that we do, separate dining rooms, plush carpetings, doorways that say executive wing, none of you mere mortals come down here. All that's about power. Power. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So my last question is, how did you transition from being the commander to writing books on leadership and speaking on the subject? How could you just give us a little quick kind of an inside look into your world on how that transition happened?
Yeah, it was mostly sort of anger and frustration. But so what happened was I had this experience, and the ship got, we set records for performance and morale. It was a great experience. I got promoted, and coming off the ship, a bunch of other guys did. It was wonderful, and everybody knew about it. And I spent another few years in the Navy, and of course, keeping in touch with the officers who had served with me, and they were getting promoted. And I had 2 second in commands, and both of them got promoted to submarine captain. And then I had 4 department heads actually, and 3 of them got promoted to submarine captain, and one of them got promoted to captain of a shipyard, which is arguably even a bigger deal because there's 6,000 people. So we're now at 100%, and then 5 of the junior officers got promoted to department head, and then got promoted to second in command, then got promoted, made it all the way through, which is really it's like a 1 in 10 or more worst selection rate.
Sure.
So the probability that all these guys from one submarine ended up getting promoted to be captains of the row submarines was highly improbable.
Got it.
I calculated once, if it was a random event, it would be like once every 100 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what happened was we had these short-term wins, which was great. But you can have some short-term wins just by barking orders and telling people what to do. But what happens is when you treat people like leaders and you say, look, you're in the decision-making process. I want you to tell me how we think we should operate. They act and start thinking like submarine captains, even when they're 2-3 ranks away, which makes the organization much stronger in the short run. But then the Navy recognizes that, and they say, oh, this guy already thinks like a submarine captain. Let's make him one.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this. And so by this point, I'm working in the Pentagon, and it was not good for me. It was highly bureaucratic. I'd seen this other way. I didn't have a lot of tolerance, patience for what was going on, and it was taking a toll on my health. And so I got out of the Navy, and then at the same time, these guys are saying, you know what, Captain, I'm the 10th guy to be selected as submarine captain. I was like, really? That's amazing.
Wow.
And my wife's like, well, that's a story you should write, because there's too many of these books out there. I conquered leadership books. I came, I fixed it, I left. Okay.
Right.
Things went back. What happened when you left? I don't know. Don't care. Right. So it's about what happens when you leave. That's when we start the leadership measuring stick.
Wow. And then you sat in your home or whatever, you wrote the book, it came out, and the rest is history at this point.
Yeah, that was dismal. That was terrible times for me. I don't know why. I'm not good at it. It took me a long time. I struggled hard. My wife had to beat me with the stick many times. Send me back to the computer.
Oh, that's awesome. You want to know why? Because we are very similar. I wrote my first book in the backseat of my car when I was almost losing everything financially over 15 years ago. And it was a tough time, man. And I get you. It's a labor intensive process.
Yeah.
So
it's good, but hey, everyone out there wants to write a book, power to you. Do it.
That's right. Well, this has really been awesome. You have been very gracious to give of your time, your wisdom. I know that we drilled down on a couple points pretty strongly, but I think it really gives tools and ideas, and it's very specific as to how to lead, how to look at the world differently, how to look at the team differently, and how to get the most out of your people. And so your book is amazing. Your workbook is also really great and full of how-tos, and it's called the Turn the Ship Around Workbook. Implement intent-based leadership in your organization. And wow, you've got some great exercises in there, questions in there, team working. strategies to go through and so forth. So my hat goes out to you. You're doing a great job. The time that we've been able to spend on this together has been awesome, and I feel privileged to have been able to interview you. Any last words from you?
No, thanks, and thanks for all your listeners out there. Remember, leadership is going to be, you're going to got to go and venture into that uncomfortable space, because you're going to be giving up control. It's going to feel uncomfortable, but that's when you know you're on the right path.
Awesome. Mr. David Marquet, appreciate the time. Make it a great one.
All right. See ya.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Podcast listeners, thanks for listening. You've taken time out of your schedule, and I really appreciate it. Now do me a favor. If you like what you heard, star it. Thanks. Now go unleash your greatness within.
GreatnessWithin.com